politics, long-haired weirdos, short-haired weirdos, vandals, hooligans.
The government, hug the government, love the government, hug the government, love the government.
Welcome to The Politics Guys, a place for bipartisan, rational, and civil debate on American politics and policy. I'm Trey Orndorff, a political scientist at Oklahoma Christian University, and I'm joined by the professor of law at Chase Law School, Ken Katkin. Ken, welcome to the midweek We're Looking at the Constitution show.
Oh, it's great to be back.
Well, I've had a lot of fun going through the Constitution, and we approached Article 1, Section 8 the way I think a lot of, political scientists, at least, when we're stepping into your field, approach it, which is we look at the necessary and proper clause first. And then what we've been kind of doing now this week is we're going to back up and take a look at the rest of the powers of Congress, maybe get in a little bit to the powers denied Congress, and finish up as much in Congress as we can. So I was just going to start reading through this a little bit, Ken. One of the big items that comes up first at the beginning of Article 1, Section 8 is this. The Congress shall have the power to lay and collect taxes, duties, imposts, and excises, to pay the debts and provide for the common defense and the general welfare of the United States. But all duties, imposts, and excises shall be uniform throughout the United States. And then it goes on to talk about to borrowing money on the credit of the United States and to regulate commerce with foreign nations and among the several states. Now, I know that you and Mike had touched that. But on the taxing clause, you wouldn't think that would be a huge deal, but that's actually a relatively big-ish question because there's this whole big argument between Madison and and Hamilton over really what's the scope for the taxing clause. We don't think about this as much now because it's really the Hamiltonian view that wins out. But Madison argued that Congress had no independent power to tax and spend. It had to be in pursuit of some specific power. Again, very similarly to the arguments that we had when it came to the necessary and proper clause. So that conception of the general welfare there at the beginning of Article 1 doesn't mean quite as much. The Hamiltonian view, though, doesn't go into kind of a full effect until much later when the Supreme Court finally weighs in. This is the case I'm sure you're familiar with, United States versus Butler in 1936. And so ever since then, this has been a lot less relevant of a big debate. But that in that case, it argues that Congress can use the taxing clause without tying it to another one of its constitutional powers. Are there any other limits on the taxing clause, Ken? I know this is one of the ones you wanted to talk about.
Yeah, well, actually, I would have probably started even a little earlier than even with. I know you started pretty early with Hamilton and Madison, but I would have started even a little earlier.
Oh, back us up then. Go for it. I love it.
Noted that one of the major defects of the Articles of Confederation, which was our earlier effort at having a constitution, was the Continental Congress did not have a taxing power, right? So
yes.
so the first. So I think some listeners probably know, or some people probably know the years. They realize that our U.S. Constitution was ratified in 1787, but they may also remember that the Declaration of Independence was signed in 1776, and that
what
war
about
was
the
over.
12 missing years, Ken?
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yes, so we had a different constitution during those years, and that was called the Articles.
We've had more than one constitution.
Yes, some people would say we had three. It depends how you count them, but.
Or not to, because you have the British, you have the Articles of Confederation, but you could make an argument for the states' constitutions too.
Oh, I was going to actually talk about the Articles of Association, which you didn't even remember about. Yeah.
True.
So during the Revolutionary War, the colonies, having declared independence from England, but having not yet formed any other kind of government, they formed an association under a document called the Articles of Association, but they replaced that with the Articles of Confederation by 1778. And then that was our Constitution from 1778 to 1787. But the reason they met secretly in Philadelphia to overthrow the United States government that had been established under the Articles of Confederation and establish a new one.
It was a radical moment. It was a
very radical moment. They felt that the Articles of Confederation was too weak for a number of reasons, that if the most essential reasons why we needed to have a United States government rather than just relying on the state governments to be independent countries that pledged freedom or friendship with one another. Why have a overriding U.S. government at all? They felt that they needed a national government primarily to be able to protect the common defense. They were pretty sure that the UK would reinvade. There were potential skirmishes even with France or Spain in the offing, as well as with the Native American Indians. And so there was a thought that they needed a stronger framework for common defense, and also that they needed to establish and enforce an internal free trade zone so that there could be a national economy, which would create conditions for material prosperity. But all of that, they wanted to have some kind of national government. But in their first iteration of it with the Articles of Confederation, they didn't give they didn't give the United States government any taxing power, and they also didn't create an executive branch or a judicial branch. So the only United States government we had under the Articles of Confederation was what was called the Continental Congress,
which is a unicameral.
Yeah, unicameral.
Continue.
And it would make laws, and it would not enforce them, and it would not have its own courts to interpret them either. And so they relied entirely on state law enforcement officials and state courts to interpret and apply federal law. And there was just no administration of the United States government, so it could be run cheaply, and they didn't necessarily need to tax, but they didn't have a taxing power. And all of that came to be seen as a hopeless defect that, particularly on the military side, the idea was we're actually going to need a United States Army, or this country is going to quickly, be conquered and defeated and disappear. And there's really no way to have a United States Army other than by having a United States government that can organize it and can fund it. And the only way to fund it is going to be through taxation. So they certainly came to see a need for a United States government that had an executive branch, which would include a military. They had a little bit more of a debate about the judicial branch, and we'll get to that when we get to Article 3.
Yeah, but I'm going to pause you right there and just say we need to talk more about this, but we got to take just a quick moment before, and we'll come back and talk a little bit more about the Articles of Confederation and what some of those framework issues were. Okay, so Ken, before we broke for just a minute, you were talking about we need to go back. We needed to talk about some of the potential problems in the Articles of Confederation, and one of that was the inability of them to raise money. As a matter of fact, the individuals who show up are well. Anyway, continue your thought on that front. Yeah.
Yeah. So I mean, you could compare that situation to the situation of the United Nations today. I think the United Nations has all these member countries, and it has a General Assembly. And it passes resolutions, and it doesn't have any capacity to enforce its resolutions. It doesn't have its own significant executive branch. It doesn't have its own courts. It's reliant on its member states to pay their dues, and sometimes they do and sometimes they don't. So the fiscal framework isn't solid, and the UN plays a certain role in world diplomacy, but it's not functioning like a real government. And that is exactly the situation the United States government was in under the Articles of Confederation. So the framers came to believe, although they had different levels of different scopes of their ambition for how much the United States government should do, they all thought it should do something, and it needed some money to do that, some resources to do that, and it needed to be able to raise its own resources and not be dependent on the member states to pay their dues. And so out of that, there was a fairly broad consensus that that not only should the United States Congress have the power to levy taxes directly on the people, rather than just having to ask the states to pay dues to support the United States government, but that in fact that's the single most important power that Congress would have. And so that's why it's first, right? So if you look at Article 1, Section 8, what you read it already, but what you didn't mention, although it was implicit in your reading, is that those are the first words of Article 1, Section 8. So all the other powers that we'll end up talking about or that we have talked about come after that, but they start right away. It gets pride of place. Congress has the power to lay and collect taxes. Now, they did put some limits on that, and some of those limits are right in Article 1, Section 8, and some of them are elsewhere, scattered here and there throughout Article 1. So the one that you see right in Article 1, Section 8, they use some terms. The Congress has the power to lay and collect taxes, duties, imposts, and excises. And that does, we might think of sort of technical meanings for excises, imposts, and duties. Taxes is a little more of a generic catch-all term there. But it seems to indicate they have certain ideas about certain kinds of taxes that can be laid, and they're authorizing that. And they end up concluding about the duties, imposts, and excises that all duties, imposts, and excises shall be uniform throughout the United States. So that's the first limitation that we can find on the use of the taxing power.
So in short, California couldn't get a different deal than New York when it comes to what's coming through borders and what's being paid.
Exactly right. That no matter, so if you have goods being imported in to a port of entry, exactly as you said, no matter whether the goods land in the San Pedro in California or whether they land at Port Elizabeth in New Jersey, the tariffs and duties and imposts have to be exactly the same everywhere.
And that's important because one of the things we don't always think about in this era that you're talking about is this question of, are the states going to be competing sovereign entities? And even post the constitutional contract, in what ways can they be independent entities, and in which ways do they have to be uniform so as not to then be trying to have potentially cleavages with them and other independent sovereign entities?
Yeah. So uniformity is very important. And interestingly, although you quickly latched on to duties and imposts, which are things that are collected at ports of entry, excises has long been interpreted to mean all excise taxes, which are taxes on transactions. So that might be not just at ports of entry. So, for instance, although most people don't really think about it much, probably most of our listeners have paid a federal excise tax in the last week or two, because one of the federal excise taxes that we do pay is at the gasoline pump. Right.
Sure.
So there's a federal gasoline tax that's per gallon. And that also has to be uniform everywhere in the United States, the tax rate. So we still see the U.S. government imposing excise taxes, which are taxes on transactions, sales taxes on some items. Now, most of the time when we go to the store and pay sales tax, it's all local and state. There's not federal excise tax on most ordinary sales. But gasoline's not the only product like that. Tobacco would be another one. There's a few products here and there that Congress has decided to impose excise taxes on for different kinds of reasons. I think with gasoline, it's just to try to distribute the cost of the budget of the budget that the federal government uses to fund highways is that way it's kind of distributed across the people who use the highways to some extent. And whereas with tobacco, I think it's there in part to just discourage people from buying cigarettes. So there's different kinds of reasons that Congress might impose an excise tax, but those also have to be uniform in the sense of geographically uniform. They have to be the same everywhere.
Now, there's some other restrictions, and this is going to get us, as I had mentioned earlier, into Article 9 as well on the taxation power, and you had alluded to. But before we do that, I'm going to have to pause us here and just say this is going to be it for our preview of the midweek show. So if you'd like to continue along with Ken and myself and continue to get to hear some interpretation, understanding of the Constitution, which I just think is absolutely central for anybody to be a citizen, I just think that's part of the educational process we need. I would love for you to go along for that ride. And to do that, we'd love for you to be a supporter. And what's really great is you're going to get the rest of this without any kind of ads or anything else going on. There's other kinds of benefits that you gain by becoming a supporter besides just access to this show, the rest of this show, and ad-free. That is, there's things like our Discord group. This show is a result of individuals on our Very Active Politics Guys Discord group. There's other Even Politics Guys gear and benefits at different levels of support. So to check that out, if you want to listen to the rest of this episode, simply head to patreon.com/politicsguys. And if you'd like to support us, there's other ways as well. You can head to Venmo, where we're at Politics Guys. You can also do it through PayPal. And all of this is going to open up your ability to listen to the rest of this preview. So all of those support links are in the show notes. Just head down there and you can tap at them, or you can direct your browser to politicsguys.com/support. Now, if for some reason you're just not in a position to do that, you can reach out to Mike at politicsguys.com, and we'd love to be able to help you out if you're having financial difficulties, and we'll get you set up. Whether you're a supporter or not, we'd love for you to think about those opportunities. We'd really love for you to continue along with this show. But just quickly, I want to let you know that you can always reach out to us at the mail at politicsguys.com or on Facebook. All of that, again, is in our show note links. The executive producers of the Politics Guys are Bruce Johnson, Wilmer Moreno, Andra Masker, Daniel Toe, Ryan Beasley, and Don Oglesby. We'll be back with a new episode fully this weekend. We hope you'll join us then.